I'm Andrew Kakabadse. I'm Professor of Governance and Leadership at the Henley Business School. My interest in governance is national, international and global. And in fact, what we've discovered is governance operates at three levels. At the level of the company or the charity, at the level of the country or the state, and geopolitically across the world. Governance at the level of the company is fundamentally concerned with compliance. Are you concerned with doing the right thing that the codes and the law says? However, the reality of governance is that boards must be very flexible. And unless they now have an understanding of what the geopolitics of the world are, the company is now vulnerable. And that is a major concern. The Ukraine situation is blown out of all proportion, but as far as any company or any charity is concerned, they should at least have an understanding of why the Ukraine, where the Ukraine is taking us, what are the implications across the world, in order for the company to at least be better prepared. What leaders need to understand about the Ukraine is that for the last 20 to 25 years, there's been a massive shift in strategic thinking. At one time, there was a clear blue water between the company and the state. The company and, if you like, the political process of the country. Now the two are overwhelmingly intertwined. So if you're in an international company and you could not have seen the Ukraine situation coming up, you would have lost a lot of money in Russia, in Eastern Europe, and in various other parts of the world. If you didn't lose a lot of money, your reputation could be badly damaged by continuing in different parts of the world unless you have a very clever corporate center with a clever PR function that can maintain presence in different parts of the world and enhance reputation. And one of them is an Austrian bank, for example. So business today is business. It is reputation enhancement. It is reputation defense. It is defense against risks. And all of those elements involve and influence share price. Many of you may ask, what has the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States got to do with the statements I've just made? In fact, it's central. The situation that we now have globally has been prepared for and planned for, I would say, the last 25 to 30 years. There is no doubt there is going to be a one world currency and a one world government. And various heads of state have been planning for this for 3 decades. The question is, which global currency and which global order is going to predominate? Many people thought it was going to be the American, the sort of transactional capital economy, what we call shareholder value. In effect, everything is a transaction, everything is a short-term investment or a deal, including the way we treat our people in society. The center of that is the Fed. The Fed is a private institution. It's not a state bank. So the Fed represents the capital structure of America. America has massive debts. And if those debts continue, and if they cannot be transferred across the world, the Fed may collapse, the American state may collapse, you may not be able to pay police, doctors, nurses, in fact, the key institutions. So preserving and defending the Fed is critical. The counter is China. And China has a very different philosophy. In academic terms, it's known as a socialized capital. In fact, what the Chinese are is they're very entrepreneurial. They behave like the Americans, but above the level of the market, the state intervenes and asks of its wealthy entrepreneurs that you will put money behind major state projects. Something that's not happened anywhere in the world is the way the Chinese dealt with poverty. 800 million people over 2 decades were moved, on average, 2,000 kilometers. This is the whole population of Australia moved every year, 23 million people, 2,000 kilometers, to get essentially its population out of poverty. These movements were voluntary. People wanted it. So how did the Chinese government pay for this? They wanted their entrepreneurs to make money, and then they demanded a contribution to this major project. So what we have, if you like, is the Federal Reserve Bank on the one hand and the Chinese state on the other. Both very plausible governance type of institutions, but they don't go together. And what will happen is one of them has to win. So if you are in business and you're looking as to which parts of the world you're going to invest, at least have the knowledge as to what in the background is going on, so that your information and your assessment of risk is at least tolerable. There is a counter-narrative to the current discussions which are going on in the West, which is Putin invaded Ukraine, that's a bad thing, we should be supporting new democracies. The counter-narrative is that from 2012 to 2014, the Ukraine and Russia were targeted as the weakest points in the link between global hegemony, the Federal Reserve Bank being global, or losing. Now, there were voices in America from 2010 onwards, notable Harvard professors, Chicago University professors, who said this is a mistake. Kissinger himself published in 2014 and said the Ukraine is a mistake. What's odd in all this, and I haven't still quite understood it, is that Russia in its economy is exactly the same as the United States. It's a transactional, capital, short-term investment economy which has almost the same degree of poverty as the United States has, the same degree of tensions in the state. So why target Russia? Well, two reasons. The first is the Russian border from Finland to the very bottom of the Ukraine is from London to Cairo. It is very vulnerable as a state. The second is, and most people in the West don't understand it, is how American Russian is. I remember going through the Kremlin and meeting various individuals, oligarchs and heads of businesses. They are favoring America. One of the opinions in the Kremlin was, we want to have no government. It was almost the right-wing side of American opinion. The state gets in the way of business. So Putin's role, in fact any head of state's role in Russia, was always vulnerable. And I think the reason that Russia was targeted was that if we can make Russia wobble, Russia will automatically come over to the United States, and that now enables the United States to face what is their real enemy, which is China. Of course, all those assumptions have gone for nothing, because by targeting Russia and inducing Russia to come into the war, that has created a sense of patriotism in the country that we've not seen for many years. The question is loss of human life in all this. Now, if you're a military planner or a state planner, all these issues would have been taken into the calculations if one creates a strategy and one penetrates another country. What will be the loss of human life? Is it worth it or not? This is nothing new. It actually was almost professionally planned from the First World War onwards. So going to Ukraine, inducing Russia to come into the conflict, which was the continual attack on the eastern Russian-speaking Ukrainians by their own government, when Putin in fact was holding out a hand of friendship, and that went on for about 18 to 19 months. The question is, what is the likely casualty rate? And with military planners, there is an acceptable casualty rate. I do not know the figures, but having seen, for example, the Iraq situation, and having seen other crisis points, the casualty rate that is acceptable could be 400,000, 500,000. And in that sense, if we can maintain casualties within those margins and win, we actually have a very good strategy. Now, is this any different in principle to what happens in business? Not really. Because if you go into a merger and acquisition, people's jobs are going to be lost, there's going to be redundancies, whole communities may not be able to find work again in more isolated areas, and still at the board level, the decision is made with these possible casualties emerging, are we going to go ahead with a merger acquisition or not? And the answer is based on the finances. So the casualty rate, regretfully and deeply regretfully, is a byproduct. The strategy and why we're pursuing that strategy is the key concern. Once the casualty rate becomes too great, it could damage the strategy, and that we don't want. Hence the calculation of what casualties are we going to be able to control. Can we argue on behalf of these casualties that they were inevitable, and can the strategy move forward? The discussion that needs to take place is simply analytical. Why we're doing this, what is the reasoning, what is the history, what is going to be the outcome, are we all going to win, are we all going to lose? And that is essentially what I'm doing. The labelling is likely to take place only in Europe and America. If we now look at the G20 of September of this year and what they said, the labelling is in fact pro-Russia. Virtually every African state now looks to China and to Russia. Let us look at South America, Nicaragua, Honduras, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, likely to be Peru, and one or two other states. They're looking east, they're not looking north to America. So what is happening is that Putin is increasingly being seen as a hero. Why? Fundamentally because they're going into these different countries with a different investment model that treats its citizens in a different way to the way the West has treated them. And so what we have is Europe and America isolated. It's very interesting. I talked to a few of my African heads of state and heads of charities, and I asked them, what do you feel about this situation? A very general question. It was interesting to see their almost immediate response, and these individuals had not met each other. The immediate response was, Russia and China treat us like humans. The Europeans and the Americans treat us as if we are serfs, and we're sick of it. The G20 of September 2023 made a statement. We don't like the war in the Ukraine, but Russia is not condemned. That was a slap in the face for the West, nothing to do with Russia. Through making that statement, what the world has fundamentally said, the global order, which was at one time in the West, is now East. In one sense, on a global level, the war is won. The world is expecting that the Chinese yuan will eventually become the dominant world currency. The way the Chinese go about investment will become the dominant factor in creating the governance of our lives throughout. Yet we're still fighting the war in the Ukraine. So we have a situation where the war is won on a global level, and yet at the local level, more and more casualties. Why more and more casualties? One reason is the West cannot face the possibility that they've lost. The second is a tactical one, and that is if you look at the way the fighting is currently happening in the Ukraine, it's down in the south. The Europeans and the Americans want access to the Black Sea. That is the one thing the Russians will not give, access to the Black Sea, because then the Black Sea fleet is completely isolated. We are in a terrible danger, more than ever before. The war is won, the fighting will continue. At any moment in time, we could have a release of nuclear weapons. That's the problem. So what to do? As a business person, as a citizen, there is one responsibility, and that is to stop arms going to the Ukraine, because it means that needlessly people are being killed. There is going to be no shift. Putin is not going to go back because Putin created those borders on the basis that the NATO head said before February 2022, we are exporting democracy east. So how can a military NATO export democracy east? So NATO is not going to shift. So what do? Now it is up to the citizen. Now it's up to the business leader, not to go out in the streets and parade, but to fundamentally say, let's look at the situation, let's put pressure on our governments, because the moment arms do not go to the Ukraine, at least we have a chance of a reasonable negotiation. I've been in Russia many times, I've been in the Ukraine many times, and I've worked with various organizations in those countries. And what do I find? A very intelligent, clever, thoughtful, responsive and fundamentally responsible group of people. Now, there is no doubt that Russia is plagued with, illicit payments. So is the Ukraine. So Russia and its institutions require maturing. So does the Ukraine. The people are lovely. And none of them want this war. This is a geopolitical global governance issue which the local population really does not relate to nor wants, just like in Britain or any other European nation. As a final thought, if we put all the morality concerns and the casualty concerns to one side and just looked at the strategy and tactics of geopolitics, why did America induce Russia to come to war when in fact Russia, the second most powerful nation in the world, is a transactional capital economy? Why did we alienate them? The third biggest economy of a transactional capital nature is India. And India has now just gone over to the other side. They have signed a treaty, a security treaty with China. It's called the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, from a citizen's point of view, If you want to control the world, fine, I understand that. Then why do you alienate the two most reliable allies and push them to the other side? And it's that logic that I'm arguing at least the citizen and the business person should be aware of. This war was going to be lost from the very start. Why did we adopt those tactics? And if we continue down this road, all that can happen is casualties. So for this reason, it's very important to stop arms going to the Ukraine, because we started on the wrong foot.